Hey guys, spoilers for Blade Runner ahead, all versions, variations, voiceovers, and origami unicorns. Hi there everyone, welcome to the second episode of Screenwriters Rewatch, a series where we venture into the IMDb Top 200 film list, pull out some of the classics, and look at them to see whether or not they deserve their place in film history. But before we get going, don't forget to like, share, subscribe if you like what we're doing here. Check out our back catalogue of work on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, you can always pop over to the Script Department website to see what's going on with our global network of screenwriters. This is going to be a weekly series. We're always going to let you know what happens, what we're going to be covering on the next one at the end of the video. So if you'd like to join the rewatch, you have plenty of time to get involved. Today, I am joined by John and by Matt for a rain-soaked, neon-illuminated and grubby look at Ridley Scott's 1980 sci-fi noir-ish Blade Runner, written by Hampton Fancher, David Webb Peoples, which was also an adaptation, which I didn't know before looking into this, and I'll explain why in a minute, but an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's 1968 novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Gents, this is going to be an interesting one today because we are covering a film that is one of my blind spots until really recently, and I got laughed at last time by a couple of you for that. But this is one of those films where I just never got around to it. It's been on my list forever, and so until only a few days ago, it was a blind spot for me. So I'm really excited for your insights and let me know what you think of this film. It's just very fresh for me. So let's get started. We're going to declare our biases, as it were, with a question on context. So Matt, tell me about your history with Blade Runner. What does it mean to you coming to this rewatch? What's your vibe?
My vibe is well, if I just show you my t-shirt, that's my vibe. I'm a bit of a fan, to say the least. I love Blade Runner. It's something, and it'd be interesting talking to somebody who hasn't seen it before. It's really fresh in your mind. It's going to be really interesting. But I remember watching it for the first time and not understanding it at all. But I was really, really young. I must have been about 10 years old. But the thing that really captured me was its visuals. I had no idea what was going on story-wise. And it caught me with the visuals. And then over the years, I've watched different cuts of it. I've watched it many, 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 many times. And I always find something new, funny enough. But I have got to sort of understand the broader meanings of what it's trying to achieve. Not saying that it totally achieves it 100%, but the ideas and everything are there. I'd say I love it, and it's a flawed masterpiece. But yeah, we'll get into that.
Love it. John, how about you?
I came to Blade Runner, I don't know, a few years after film school, I guess. Should have probably seen it during film school. I think they were talking about it quite a lot, and I just never... I'm one of those guys where if everybody talks about the movie, I just don't watch it because I'm like, you're just forcing me to watch it now, basically. And so... Even this series is becoming a bit of a chore. Yeah. But I know, and I watched it, but I have to say, I'll probably, be on Matt's enemy list by the end of this. I really didn't enjoy my first time with Blade Runner. I've since come to really kind of respect it for what it is as a film. But when Blade Runner 2049 came out, maybe a conversation for a different video, that movie was everything I wanted the first one to be. When I saw it in the cinema, and I thought, yes, this is what I was hoping for all along with the first Blade Runner film. And so it took me a while to get my Blade Runner fix. But the first time I saw it, it didn't do it for me. And I've since come to realize the reason why is because I feel like I've been missold this film. Not missold in terms of, people lying about what it really is or, false marketing or anything like that. But I feel like it's been described like you described it, noir, sci-fi, etc. And it is, but I think in my mind, I was expecting something that was more akin to the noir films that I've seen in the past.
Sure.
And this was, I think that, it's an incredibly unique film. It's an incredible departure from so many different genre conventions and stereotypes and so on in cinema. Not stereotypes, but tropes in cinema, cliches in cinema that I feel like I was just not prepared my first time around watching it. Mm-hmm. I've since come to really appreciate it, but that doesn't mean that I still really enjoy the film as an experience as much. I do enjoy it more because I kind of know what to expect now. But yeah, I've always had a very hot and cold relationship with Blade Runner. It's one where I can't really settle on how I really feel about it. Maybe this talk will help with that. I don't know.
We could call it Blade Runner noirish therapy, because it's kind of interesting because I watching this, as I say, for the first time the other day and again this afternoon, I'm inclined to agree with you, John, on in terms of what you kind of see it as a package, because there's a reason why I chose to call it noirish, because it doesn't. The first time I was looking at it, I was thinking, okay, the elements are here, and I see this, but it is, but isn't, and there's a lot more kind of going on there that perhaps doesn't fall into it. And I think the second time around, I think perhaps I came in with too many preconceptions about what I'd heard about Blade Runner and what I'd been told about Blade Runner, and this idea, this film's amazing, because I actually just watched it for the second time as a moviegoer, kind of taking all thought out of it. And god damn, it's an entertaining piece of cinema visually. From a visual point of view, it just looks so great. So great. And I think it'd be fun to talk about that. We're a screenwriting podcast, but I mean, that is the thing that really jumps out to me. Matt, what the visuals, what do they, I guess it's a kind of an open-ended question, but what do you think they are? What's so special about those visuals? What do you think it is that kind of makes them stand the test of time?
Yeah, I've thought about this. I mean, there's obviously legendary design going on here in terms of like the finite details of everything that's in that set. I mean, there's books about it. There's if you watch the special features of the making of the film, it just goes into this massive detail, like magazines on a rack in the background that you never really see. We're completely designed from scratch, so it's that level of design. But you'd think that would be something that is like a pointless task, but it does seep into everything in the film, and everything that in terms of design is just perfection to me. I think it's a masterclass in design, but not just that, it's how it's shot as well. And I've actually thought about this it's like quite a lot over the years. I can't put my finger right on it, but something that really steps out in terms of when I've looked at even something like the new Blade Runner film and other films in that sort of that league, that area, so blockbuster films. There's a lot of, because of visual effects and because of what we can do now, we have these large sweeping shots of cityscapes and all that. And I think this is what Blade Runner does. It's part of the design, it's part of the intention of how to tell the story, but also the limitations were there as well. We couldn't replicate those shots. But if you look at those street scenes, especially, we're always at that level most of the time. There's obviously the sort of flying shots of where we see a little bit more, but it's quite intimate. It's quite sort of crowded. They put people right in front of the camera. It feels really claustrophobic. It feels really like an overpopulated world. So that really, in those first few sort of scenes, that really draws you in there. And obviously we go further out, but it's very intimate in all aspects of the shots as well, because there's so many close-ups, like really extreme close-ups that make it so intimate. Obviously, like visually in terms of framing and lighting and all that sort of technical stuff, it's influenced a lot of other films. But in terms of storytelling, that decision to be close all the time just makes it stand out. I think it makes it more than just something that is in that realm of science fiction. It makes it because it is an intimate story in its essence, even though it was advertised and is kind of always talked about as a bigger film, but is really intimate in what it's trying to sort of talk about. And I think that's where those things in terms of storytelling and visuals sort of marry and meet. I think Cronenworth, the cinematography was an absolute cinematographer, was an absolute genius, and
Yeah.
did things that just like the meeting in the Tyrell's building, and you see all the reflections of like water, and it gives this sort of weird sort of I don't know, like it's like a golden shimmer to the whole place. You know, this is like an affluent like area, and this is above the street level and everything. It just makes everything glitter. There's no reason for that to be there at all. There's no water in that room. Yeah. It's just really clever sort of design that does weird things to your brain and eye, which is what the best cinematography does.
I think it. Yeah, go on, John.
No, I was going to say, to me, you know, you mentioned like it's a screenwriting podcast and we're talking about cinematography here, but to me that the way that the world is presented to us is so effective at just bringing me into that world and making me feel like, all right, I totally understand this world. Yep. It's a detective looking for some fugitives at its heart. That's it. You know, it's a completely understand. I've seen this story in some respects before, so I understand what I'm getting into here. I also, you know, there's a shot of him sitting down at a street food vendor, and he's reading a newspaper, if I'm not mistaken, in the rain. And I just think, right, I get this world. I get how this works. This works like so many cities in our world where, yeah, you just have your dinner sitting at a street stall, you know, and those little moments for me just completely sucked me into the world. And that's the thing, you know, like when I said I have a hot and cold relationship with this movie. When things are working for me, they are working better than most movies, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't be interested in discussing this otherwise, you know, and to me, I think when it's not working for me, it's only because it's so effective at evoking all those movies that I love. Like I love Chinatown. I love the Sam Spade movies and the old Humphrey Bogart kind of Private Eye movies. For me, I'm seeing all of that in this, and I'm expecting the story to move in a you know, plot by plot kind of moment, plot point by plot point kind of breakneck speed sometimes. And it doesn't, because it's a very different type of movie, really, in its soul. And hats off to Ridley Scott for doing all that, and, you know, and so on. But it's that weird thing where it does such a great job of sucking me in, and then I just start to forget that I'm not watching Sam Spade, and I'm not watching Jake Giddies, and so on. I'm watching Deckard, you know. So yeah, I just think it's a masterclass in how to just bring you into that world.
For sure. We talked about the Batman recently on another episode of this, and we talked about the idea of a city being a character in the film, and I don't think I've ever seen it done better than this. It feels the lifeblood of the city. You understand it the moment you walk into it. And Scott does this thing, I think, which is really interesting, where he lingers on shots. And I kind of thought this was you see this in other things at the same sort of time, you know, the idea of certainly in television, which I'm not comparing this to TV, but like, you know, you see someone walks out of a door and they wait until the door is shut before they cut away and things like that. But with this, the first time I watched it, I thought, oh, okay, we're in the 80s. Yeah, they're gonna hold for longer. I'll get used to it. It'll be fine. But then the second time around, looking at it, I realized that it wasn't just that. It wasn't just that that's what they did then. It's so important, and it helps you to be immersed in the heartbeat of this environment, and all the dirtiness and the hugeness and the disparity of wealth and things like that. So as a storytelling kind of device, you're right, John. It's so crucial, and I want to talk about the first scene for a second, and because again, watching it the second time around today, the first thing I spotted was the size of everything compared to these very, very little people. And you take this long time, this long shot, and I'm kind of sat there going, okay, this is taking a really long time. But then you kind of get into it. You go, oh wow, this great pyramid, this is great. And then they're sat down, and you actually get into this interrogation, which is just brilliantly kind of put together as well. And you look up, and there's a fan. There's like a 12-foot fan on the ceiling. So even when they're inside in this very intimate space, everything's bigger than them and everything is dwarfed by them. And I think that it tells you, and kind of looking at a screenplay, the way this is written as from a screenplay point of view, and that initial scene, because I actually looked it up, that tells you everything you need to know about the attitude of this movie to its subject matter from the word go. People are small, society is big, and we hate replicants, but actually there's one and he's kind of responding like you would expect a human to, and you don't necessarily see that coming. And then they play with it later on. And it's all condensed into that one first scene. I think it's just masterful work. Like, it grabbed me. It grabbed me.
We agree.
Yeah, totally.
Great.
Cool. It has a very interesting editing style as well. I think I think you've caught on to that as well. I think especially if you watch those first, those first three shots of the film, and the way they're sort of paced is really interesting, because it couples like these lingering shots with these almost sort of art style, sort of very brief edit, sort of brief cuts that really feel kind of make you sort of focus on what is going on. But yeah, I think in terms of those opening shots, I think it draws you in so well. But I think it's more than just how it looks. There is the argument of it being people enjoy it because it looks so good and because it's so masterful technically. I think there's more going on, but I think again there is a flaw. Even though I love it, I think I mean, I don't know what cuts you've watched or what cuts we're sort of talking about, but this
is a hot topic between John and I, because
very good
segue. When we were talking about this, I said to him, what cut do you want to watch? And he's, there's only the one cut, and I can report to you, John, that actually there were three cuts available on Amazon Prime.
Really? So you can actually get other ones outside of? Why would they allow that?
I don't know, but there's the final cut, and then there's two cuts. The final cut, and then there's the original theatrical release.
Yeah, I can't imagine why Ridley Scott would want anything other than his definitive cut or final cut, whatever it is.
Yeah,
that to me sounds strange. I mean,
it's an odd thing. Yeah, I watched the final cut, the definitive.
Yeah.
This is the one, the stamp to prove jobby.
Well, yeah, this is the one that I suppose Ridley Scott wants us to be watching, right? I wonder, does he want the theatrical release to be available? I'd be very interested.
Unless it's a kind of a comparison job, like you can look back and you can say you can watch either one of them and look at the changes, perhaps like that. I mean, it's on Amazon. I assume there's a little.
If I hadn't said anything to you, which one would you have been inclined to watch?
I would have watched the original cut. 100%.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I would have gone straight for the original cut. Yeah, because I would have looked at that, because again, coming into this without really, I might have looked into it a bit more and landed on the final cut. But going into this cold, I would have said, well, that's got to be the purest form. That's the original one. That's the one that that hasn't been messed around with. Maybe because I've been subjected to George Lucas tinkering with Star Wars for so long. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's the mindset. But for me, the original cut would be the purer cut. Of course, I know differently, having looked into it and having had conversations about it. But that would have been the one I'd go for. Yeah, for sure.
I would never. Yeah, I think that's just. I think I'm somebody who, whether it's the original or that's never really bothered me. I think I've always been more interested, like, what is it, the one that the artist wants me to watch? Like, if I was to sit down and have dinner with Ridley Scott and we were to talk about Blade Runner, which version is he going to be talking to me about? If we were to talk about the story and the characters and so on, and our favorite scenes and so on and so forth, which one is he going to be automatically programmed to kind of talk about, so to speak, with me? And I always wonder, like, Matt, what would your kind of if you're pressed for time and you're going to pick one to watch, which one would you watch out of curiosity?
I would always watch the newest version. I haven't gone back to the first version, theatrical cut for a long time. I haven't watched it since probably the 90s. But I think that cut it's still flawed. I think there's one thing we could talk about in particular that relates to everything that's going on, and it's a good conversation how good the director actually knows their own film, is the unicorn scene.
Yeah,
I think the unicorn memory that Deckard has that's planted in that version, in that cut, is extremely sort of problematic.
So walk us through it, Matt. Like contextualize it in the story and stuff like that.
So I think that there's a background in terms of behind the scenes where I think the writer, so Fancher particularly wrote Deckard, and in the book as well. Deckard is human, and from what I know is I think everybody on the production saw that character as human, apart from Ridley Scott, it seems. So there's moments in the film, and I don't know how late in the day Ridley Scott decided that it'd be, I don't know, clever to do that, or posing that sort of question to the audience. So we could talk about whether that works or not. I have my own opinion on that, but yeah, a very strong opinion on that. I'm talking like I hate the film, basically. But I do like the film.
That's what happens in these things, man. We sit there, we all like something, and we end up picking it apart until we don't like it anymore, and then we remind ourselves that we like it at the end. It's like you're in good company. You're safe.
Every single Star Wars discussion we've had has been bashing Star Wars from top to bottom, but then just glowing with praise.
I'm having an existential crisis here, I think, and questioning all my choices in life. Yeah, but anyway, and that moment in early cuts, it isn't there. There's this moment where Deckard is having a reflective moment, and then it cuts to a shot of a unicorn running through a very sort of misty sort of countryside, this sort of woods, and incidentally, that's shot is from another Ridley Scott film. It's from Legend that he directed before this.
Oh, really?
This film. It was kind of around about the same time they were making that film. So he just lifted that shot as like an outtake from the film
what a
Legend.
Weird choice.
Sorry. Could you imagine if like Spielberg did that now with like West Side Story, and then there's just a shot from like, I don't know, some other movie of that same period. Like
it's weird. It's weird because in those two versions, there are shots lifted out of other films. So like the ending of the original cut, we have Rachel and Deckard driving. We have this aerial shot of them driving through this sort of mountain landscape.
Wow, really?
And they're, we don't know where we're going to go, what's going to happen, but we have each other, that sort of thing, that sort of ending. It's a romantic, happy sort of ending. That shot of the aerial shot is an outtake from The Shining. So that's one of the pieces of footage they used in The Shining. So it's bizarre that it happened in both these versions.
That's so weird.
Can I just say thank God he didn't direct Jaws as well, because we'd have some sharks in there or something like that. I mean,
yeah,
my
that
God,
guy jumping the shark. Yeah, Christ, that's bizarre. Yeah. What a weird thing.
I think it's one of those things that does happen when there's like it's same with the voiceover as well from the original. I know we're going off track a little bit, but
I want to talk about voiceovers actually. Yeah,
that voiceover is something that happened after the film was made. It was. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's the same with this as well. I think Ridley Scott had an idea of what he wanted that character to be, and thought. I think he was very stubborn in thinking that he wanted Deckard, this question of whether Deckard is human or not. But narratively, it doesn't really work at all, because there are moments in the film where he has clearly thought about him being a replicant, where there's moments in the background of Rachel where we have sort of the glow in his eyes that makes us question. It's very subtle. So these little subtle things, but he's probably the worst replicant out of any replicant, if he is a replicant, because he's not more human than human. He's maybe not even sort of, it doesn't make sense that he would be the same level like Nexus 6 as Rachel as well, because why would he be a sort of a Blade Runner? Why would he be none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense at all.
I'm glad. See, I guess that is to be the issue I have with one of the issues I have with Blade Runner is that I'm watching it and I'm totally suckered in by the world and the atmosphere and the characters, and I love just hanging out with everybody in this movie. I think it's brilliant, and I love visiting the Tyrell building, and it's just fantastic, right? But then every so often I get these little moments where I'm reminded there is an incoherence in terms of, or I suppose a failure to just settle on an idea. And it does feel like there's this tug of war happening between writer and director, perhaps, or producer and director, perhaps, or audience and director, perhaps, where we're kind of presuming the story's going in one direction, but Ridley Scott seems to be changing his mind halfway through. And that's a very simplistic kind of approach to it. But that is my feeling when I watch it. And part of it is I know how this film was made. Like, I know a lot of the stories you've just mentioned. And so there's a part of me that is bringing that knowledge to it. But when I go and watch Blade Runner 2049, for example, I think there was a clear vision here. There was a clear idea in play. And we're not going to be getting a rewritten version of that 20 years from now, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting because coming at it cold, for me, it was just, oh, okay, he's a replicant. That was just what it was, because it wasn't the unicorn. That stopped me cold. That I just thought, okay, that's weird. I don't understand that. But and I didn't on the second viewing of it as well. I understand it. I understand the significance of it. I just thought, okay, weird choice. But it was that little moment where he turns around and his eyes have the light behind them, and then I kind of go onto the internet and do a little bit of research and everything, and I find out people are having these great big arguments about whether or not he's a replicant, and I'm like, well, he is. That's just it. And then you have the origami unicorn at the end and everything like that, and it kind of comes full circle. And in the final cut, as it were, the one I watched, it feels as though you're leading on to potentially a sequel of some kind, because it kind of just cuts off there and everything, which I thought was quite an interesting choice. And I thought, wow, okay, so now perhaps he's going on to discover the truth about himself. And I felt like it dovetailed all right. That was one of the things I didn't mind about it. But that's me coming at it with no context of any of the behind the scenes stuff, no concern for any of the other cuts. For me, it was just, okay, he's a replicant and that's just it. So we'll just kind of work it out. But it's interesting now hearing you talk about it, because it makes sense that there are actually some narrative leaps that I perhaps overlooked.
But Matt, isn't the eyes, because I watched it again a few months back, and when the eyes, I decided, I was Googling the eyes, the kind of the red dot in the eyes, like someone's taking your photograph with it. 20 years ago,
it's a red eye.
But the doesn't the cinematographer even say that was just a stylistic thing? It wasn't actually meant to be meaningful as to who's a replicant and who's not, because there are people in the film who have the red eye that aren't really replicants.
Yeah, I think it's the tech. It might have been an accident. I mean, the technique would make like the other people in the frame's eye. So there's a shot where you clearly see Rachel in the foreground with the red eye, we'll call it, and in the background, Harrison Ford's Deckard comes into shot, and then but it's very faint on him. So whether that was like intended or just like because they had to do these things practically, that it just happened and they couldn't sort of digitally remove it or something like that, or they forgot to do that. It's a whole question. So that makes it like, but I think the intention was not totally stylistic. I think because we see the owls. So in the book, there's a whole thing about there are no real animals, or animals are really scarce. So they're robotic animals. So we see that owl. We see the owl in Tyrell's office space or whatever we call it, his penthouse, to show that Tyrell can he has the money and the means to have those sort of things. But plus, when we see that on the owl, and then we see that on Rachel and the other replicants later on as well, that I think that's meant to indicate that they are, that it wasn't just a stylist. I think it was meant to be a narrative choice. Yeah.
That's really interesting, that, John, because that was, for me, was just such a, it's interesting hearing you both talk about it, because that for me was just such a clear sign. It was like, yeah, he's a replicant, and you stop and the owl is turning, and okay, the owl's a replicant, and his eyes did the same thing, therefore he's a replicant. And I was kind of, reading into narrative stuff, so it's interesting if it was a stylistic thing.
No, but I love it. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it initially, but then I thought, wow, what an amazing little effect that the light has to hit it the right way, and then suddenly
Yeah.
But then I was like, well, why did they need to do a test then?
Yeah.
And so it threw up those kind of questions, and I remember this thing, is it? And then I think,
Is this a symptom though of the troubled kind of birth of this thing? Is that because there are things, that occurred to me as well, that kind of, well, why are we doing a test if you can quite clearly just shine a light in their eyes and it's all good? If the camera picks it up, and just film them through a lens, and you'll know if they're a replicant or not. And that's a big, I'm all for suspension of disbelief and narrative, allowing these narrative leaps, but that was a big one for me. I feel like I've been inducted into an area of the internet I didn't know about before. This is so interesting. Thanks for bringing me in gently. I want to talk, while we're just on the area of different versions of the film, I want to talk about the voiceover, the lack of inclusion in the voiceover in the final and everything like that. We did a video a while back on our pet peeves, and voiceovers are one of my big pet peeves. I really, really, really dislike them in most things. And I knew going in, or I thought I knew going in, that this had a voiceover in it. And I've since looked it up and realized that there are, these kind of noir-y voiceovers in other versions of it. I am biased on voiceovers, and I didn't miss it in this. I thought it worked perfectly well without it. I imagine so did Ridley Scott, given this is the final version of that film. So happy days there. But Matt, you as a little more of an aficionado, perhaps, where do you land on that as a screenwriting technique and its inclusion kind of in this film?
I think I'm not 100% opposed to it. There's a place for voiceover. In this film, there is no place for voiceover, just because of the way the way it's made. It's clearly. You make those comparisons between the two. It was clearly never intended to have voiceover. It works so much better without the voiceover because of the tonally. It's meant to be reflective. It's meant to make you think about the philosophical things happening through the visuals and the actions of the characters. The traditional sort of way we make films and write films. And I think with the voiceover, it does what. It's the worst kind of voiceover because it just really pummels you with what is going on. It's basically telling you what is happening. And we've just seen what has happened. So we've just seen something, and then he's explaining what's just happened. And the whole thing was birthed around that because the producers were afraid, or the studio were afraid, that people weren't going to understand this film, that people weren't sophisticated at the time to understand this type of film, which I had no idea why, because we've just come off the back of that whole, wave of 70s, cinema, that great era of cinema. Why wouldn't people understand? Maybe it's birth of the blockbuster and people wanted to appeal to that, which is maybe why this film is seen as, this weird mishmash of some people expect it to be this blockbuster film, and it really sort of isn't. Even it kind of is, but kind of isn't. But yeah, I think it doesn't work at all. It does what you should never do with the voiceover, is we see what happens, you show, and then you tell, and it's you shouldn't be doing that at all. And I think that's the big issue with this, plus the way it's executed, because as legend goes, Harrison Ford was so opposed to the voiceover that he just tried his best to do the worst recording of the voiceover so they wouldn't use it. And it's terrible. Like, his performance is totally monotone, totally terrible. It kind of works a little bit, but it's I think it's awful, and but they used it.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that, because the actually performances was something I wanted to talk about in this, because for me the big number one low light of this film is Harrison Ford, because I think he's phoning it in. I don't think it feels for me as though there is so little going on, and it feels like he's coasting on his kind of charm and charisma, and he's just allowing it to go forward. There's a moment where he tells her that she's a replicant and he's making this thing, and he turns around and kind of just looks up and goes, it's as if you can see him in his head doing a voiceover as he's going, and he's like, I feel bad now, and he goes, you're not a replicant. I feel bad. Go home instead. I just it kind of works, and I understand what he's going for, and I understand how that's kind of meant to be perceived, in the sense that it's this, he's a disaffected, down on his luck cop, and he doesn't believe in anything. But then as it goes along, he doesn't emote anymore unless he's being punched. Like, that's the only time you really see him emote in any way, and the rest of it is just this kind of stone face. Is that just me, or is that a thing?
I think that's an argument a lot of people have with this. I don't think he was trying to sabotage the film. He definitely tried to sabotage the voiceover, but I don't think he was trying to sabotage the film. But I don't think he was first choice either. I think Dustin Hoffman was meant to be first choice, I think. Which that would have been a totally different film, I think, with that performance. But I think he's just trying to be really, really subtle, to the point of he's almost replicant, robotic himself when he's performing. He does kind of remind me of sort of Ryan Gosling in a way, the way Ryan Gosling approaches some of the roles that he's done, especially the Nicholas Winding Refn roles, where he's really sort of being really sort of mute and subtle as he can. But some people can read that as really phoning it in. It's a really fine line between performance and non-performance.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, my background is acting, and so perhaps I'm a little oversensitive to it. But it's one of those things when you put it up against you put him up against Roy, who is borderline Shakespearean in his delivery.
Oh yeah.
And you know, and wonderful, you know, Tears in the Rain as kind of it comes across a little, perhaps it's a little bit much, but at the same time, I don't hate it. I think it's fine, and it works well. You kind of put those two next to each other, and it should be, I don't know, I just don't feel like Ford really comes up to meet him, is all.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is Rutger Hauer's film, I think. I think he totally steals the whole thing, but he really just went for it as well. He wasn't really that well known at the time either, and he just went above and beyond. Like all the tattoos you see, I think he's had a hand in designing it and embodied it. And he's a different type of actor. Harrison Ford is almost like in the mold of, at the time especially, you know, of a Hollywood actor. But yeah, Rutger Hauer's different.
We spent last year pitching a Private Eye story around around LA and so on, and the feedback kept coming back to us was the protagonist needs a little bit more dimension to his character. That the other characters are fine, but if this is going to be the protagonist of the piece, he needs to be more well-rounded. Mm-hmm. And we kept kind of rattling our brains about this, trying to figure it out. Like, how do we make this character bigger without kind of affecting the rest of the story and, you know, the pace and structure, because everything else kind of worked so well together. And we realized that because we were leaning so heavily on the old noir kind of model, you know, these characters were rarely that well developed to begin with, and it was always the detective was always a vehicle to explore the seedy underbelly of the city, or it was to explore the other characters. It was to explore this, you know, corrupt judge, or this gangster, or, you know, this femme fatale, or whatever. And I do think that Blade Runner falls into that exact same kind of I don't want to say a trap. It's doing its job so well in many respects that it does have quite a one-dimensional protagonist that is having these through re-edits and so on has now found greater dimension. And through kind of contrived voiceover, we're able to get that a greater kind of dimension to the character. Is he a replicant? Isn't he? I feel like the only reason we're even having those questions is because we're looking for more layers to Deckard as a character. We're not, the Roy Batty's character is so interesting and so subtly developed throughout the film, as is Rachel and all the other characters it's Rachel, isn't it?
It is Rachel,
yeah. Rachel, yeah, sorry. That I think they're naturally well-developed characters because that's always been it's always been where these types of stories, the direction these types of stories have gone on, have moved in. And it's funny because they're doing their job very well, but that's the cost of it, is that typically the private eye character doesn't get the and if you're naming the film after him and his job, then it's putting a spotlight on this character that maybe he's not that capable of, it's putting a burden on the character's shoulders that maybe he wasn't designed for. Whereas if maybe it had been, if the title had maybe referred to the world itself or a MacGuffin or something like that, the emphasis wouldn't be on Deckard to be this beautifully developed character that we all want him to be, or that we all kind of have started to project onto. Anyway, I'm sorry, it's just a theory.
I think it's an interesting question whether that whole idea of who is he actually really created this conflict in the film and actually stopped his character from being developed, because it's a great story would be, which a like hard-boiled detective, a detective that has lost their humanity and begins through having to take down these replicants and starting to understand them, finds his humanity again, and that's maybe more of an interesting arc for that character. But it's kind of there, but it isn't. It's sort of overshadowed by this other stuff that's been attempted but doesn't really work. And I think that is my major gripe with the film is that, really, because it does overshadow some other things.
Can I ask you guys a question? Would you prefer the ambiguous let's all discuss whether or not he's right, or would you rather the film just took a hard stance on it? No debate, nothing. It's a hard stance. Here is the truth about this character. Which one would you prefer? Assuming both are well-written movies nonetheless, would you prefer to come to it from the point of view of, like, without feeling cheated in any way, like, which one would you prefer?
I mean, to me, it did. And that's what's so interesting about this, is that to me it did. It was for me, it was a case of, he's a replicant, I wasn't aware of any kind of question in that, and it was that eye thing. It is just what did it. But I think I would probably prefer. I think there's nothing wrong with a bit of ambiguity, and I think that this film certainly has it. And I think on occasion I prefer a little bit more, because I think the actual story for a film that is heralded as this quite cerebral kind of thing, the story is actually quite simple. It's quite straightforward. There's nothing wrong with a simple story, but I think perhaps maybe this argument and this conversation comes from a deeper desire, like you said a minute ago, Matt, for the character, but also perhaps from the story as a whole. You have this beautiful, rich world, and we just want a little bit more depth. But yeah, for me, I think it. For me, it did, but I mean, your answer is probably more interesting to that, Matt.
No, I agree. I think it makes it. I think the ambiguity, the question, the argument about whether he is or not has come through the different cuts, because in the first one, it's not. I don't think it's really that much of a question, but people started to question whether he was or not, and then as we went along with the different cuts, it became more clear to me that he is a replicant. I think that's the point that Ridley Scott was making. It's like, I'm going to make this final cut now and nobody can question this. I'm going to just say he's a replicant, which I think that's what happened.
What's so interesting is that Denis Villeneuve, when he was making Blade Runner 2049, he had a sit-down panel discussion with Ridley Scott, And Ridley Scott said, well, Deckard's a replicant, and so blah, blah, blah. And then Villeneuve interrupted him and said, well, I disagree with you. I think Scott said something along the lines of, like, it didn't come up in discussion. He was just talking about the direction of the story and the kind of things you have to think about for a sequel and all that kind of stuff, because I think he was the producer of the sequel. And he said, well, you know, I mean, obviously Deckard is a replicant, and so blah, blah, blah. And then Villeneuve interrupted and said, well, I disagree with you on that. I don't think it's obvious that he's...
That's so interesting.
And so they made a $200 million movie or whatever it was off the back, where the producer and director were in disagreement about... about Harrison Ford's identity in this film. Like that to me is really interesting, I think. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
So just a very quick thing. I haven't seen Blade Runner 2049, but spoilers, we're going to talk a little bit about this now. So spoilers, if you haven't seen it, then turn off. Because I don't mind that. They don't answer, there's no definitive answer in 2049 whether or not Harrison Ford is a replicant.
It's very cleverly handled, I think.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, very cleverly handled.
It still poses that question, but I mean, we do obviously. I mean, the poster art shows an old Harrison Ford, so we know that he's in there and he's aged. But then again, these like Nexus 6, people have this question of whether he is a Nexus 6, which to me doesn't make sense. But Nexus 6s can sort of maybe grow old and there's another question in the film that relates to that sort of model as well, which I won't spoil anything for you. But looking at that film as well, it makes it very clear who Ryan Gosling's character is. And that's to its benefit, I think. We're just told, you know, it doesn't have to pose that question. The original Blade Runner doesn't have to pose that question at all. And I think looking at like that last Rutger Hauer scene, that's where it really hammers home what the film's about, and it should just not ask another question after that at all. That what he says there, and I know that it's partly improvised, but the sort of the original scene, it does hammer home what that film is about, and that's where the film should really sort of end.
You know, in a weird way, the re-edits have done more damage than for that question of like whether or not he is or whatever, because you know, we bring so much with us into movies now. We bring so much knowledge of previous, you know, and edits and all that kind of stuff in when we watch a film. And if you were going into that film and you, like, there is no explicit active question at the beginning of this film. Is Harrison Ford one of them? You know, and it doesn't have to be explicit, but there's not even a subtle attempt to kind of raise that question. It's one of these things that you kind of feel like they accidentally posed and didn't mean to, you know, that's kind of the way it comes across. And they don't quite know how to get themselves out of that question. And for me, it's one of those things where you know what Ridley Scott wants to achieve with this final edit. So it's almost like the question is being posed just by virtue of the fact that it exists as an edit. And now we're looking for that answer in the film. And it doesn't come in the clearest way. It doesn't really, the answer doesn't come at all, but there's clues and potential evidence, you know. Because
it's interesting. The reason I asked the question is because that does, in a way, almost hurt it for me a little bit. Because the end of this film, I think it was 2007 or 2009, I can't remember which one now, but this final cut came out, so it was a while ago. But to me, the final cut there and the way they did that with the unicorn being picked up and everything like that, and that being the end of the film, tells me we're going to look into this further. It's signposted this idea, this last idea, this unicorn that we saw, which says about this, and we've seen about the eyes and all this, that, and the other. This tells me this is what we're focusing on now. Deckard, just when he's got some kind of something to believe in again, some kind of humanity back, we're going to make him face the possibility that perhaps his humanity is a lie in this thing that, you know, what the question that this film poses, what are you? What is being alive? What is being human? Is it your memories? Is it this nature, nurture, blah, blah, blah. And so that hurts it for me a little bit in terms of a structured narrative, an idea of a thought out story and a thought out edit as well, because I think it's a shame that doesn't go on to kind of answer that question.
What I would
Yeah.
say, Marcus, though, is the sequel is, to me, the sequel is so good, like so pitch perfect.
Yeah.
Just personally, that to me it elevates the first film to the point where
Oh, interesting.
I don't even have a problem. Like if I watch Blade Runner on its own, and I see issues with it. If I watch it with Blade Runner 2049, or just think about it in context with 2049, I just think, yeah, it's amazing. Like it's absolutely amazing, and I've no gripes with it because of what the second one does to elevate the world, the story, the character of Deckard as well. And it I don't know how you felt, Matt, about it, but to me, you know, a lot of sequels can unravel things by pulling too hard on threads posed in the first film. This, to me, proves Villeneuve is the guy you go to if you ever want to make a sequel, or you ever want to do a reboot or a remake or anything that is lovingly respectful to the original or to the source text or whatever, you know. He's the perfect guy to be doing Dune. He's the perfect guy to be doing a Blade Runner sequel and so on. And yeah, I mean, I won't go into just you watch it, you are in for a hell of a treat with it. But
yeah, for sure,
it minimizes the amount of times I feel cold with Blade Runner with the first one. Like it really does. It's just I'm just all in for that world now after that second film came out.
Yeah,
I understand what you mean. How did you feel about the second one briefly? Like,
yeah, I liked it overall. I have issues with it, but it's editing issues. I think you could. There's a film there that if you ruthlessly edited it, it needs a lot chopping off. I think you could chop like 30 to 40 minutes off that film to make it really good. I think so.
But you know, for me,
maybe half an hour.
I love living in that world so much, and that's Ridley Scott's. That's all credit to Ridley Scott. You know, he did such a good job of making me just want to hang out in that world that I don't want to cut anything off of Blade Runner 2049 for that exact reason. You know.
I mean, I think it's mostly like character stuff that I'm like the sort of the things that we're sort of living in, and the scenes where it makes you feel like you're actually immersed in it are really, really good. And a film does really well with all that stuff. There's just pacing issues, I think anyway, but I still like it. I mean, I've got a picture here that my friend made for the film, but I did enjoy it, but yeah, I would edit it, but I've got my editing cap on when I'm thinking that way.
It's a good cap to have. I mean, it's a good thing. It's a good way of looking at a film, you know. I mean, I think that it's interesting. You talk about the kind of the world and wanting to live in it. I almost feel like I agree with you. I love that world, and I love the way it is. And I can't comment on 2049 because I haven't seen it yet, and I will do. But that's the thing, is that it makes me want to go watch it, and it makes me have expectations for it. But it's the world, not the story. It's the visuals and the realization of it, not the story, that makes me do that. And I don't really know what point I'm making there. I was not grabbed by the story of this. It didn't reach through the screen and tell me you have to sit here and you have to watch it. It's not a long film, but I felt as though it was on occasion quite long. And I think some of those are some of those edits we were talking about, those long holds on things and things like that. I'll be honest with you, and I'm going to make sure you're okay after this, Matt. But I came away quite cold from the actual viewing experience. It just didn't. There was something about it that just didn't grab me, other than the visuals of it, and other than that kind of thing. Are you okay? Do we need to talk about it? I just want to.
I agree. I think there's issues with with my editing cap on with this film. There's things I would cut as well, but I wouldn't cut scenes. I would cut the pacing of some moments in the scene. So, for example, there's the bit where he's looking at the photograph. He's investigating the photograph, and it's like zoom in, enhance 35B or whatever, and it takes forever. That it's interesting. It was actually, I feel like it's longer and longer the more I watch it, because I think at the time it was kind of a cool little thing in terms of like a gadget. Well, like watching that in the 80s, I was like, oh man, imagine if you can do that in the future. We kind of can do that now, like really quickly by just pinching a picture. So it doesn't have the same impact. So I would edit those things down. Like you said, there are some lingering moments where just shaving a bit off that would really just pick up the pace. I think a lot of people have issue with the Roy Batty Deckard sort of cat and mouse chase at the end.
Really?
There are moments where there's a lot of sort of build up to that, but I think that's perfect.
Yeah,
I really
that,
enjoyed that.
I enjoyed that. For me, that was when I kind of sat up and went, okay, here we go then. Like that we're doing something now, you know? I
think it's a case of he's got a gun and he's not really using it. I think that's maybe one of the things that's going on. There's action, but there isn't. I think there's a lot of character stuff going on, and it's a lot of stakes in terms of this cat and mouse thing that's going on. That's exciting to some people, like us as screenwriters, but to a general audience that might not be into that sort of philosophical stuff that's going on. They see a gun, they want it to be used.
But that's why I think it is a film that was incorrectly sold. And I'm not saying this was the marketing department or this was the studio trying to wrap it up into something it wasn't. I do think that just creatively this has a lot of the, it is very clearly, inspired by the hard boiled detective stories. It is like the poster has a guy with a gun as if it's like, he's ready to turn a corner and just start blasting, and even the title, I'm sorry, but I do think the title has a role to play in this. It's called Blade Runner. This makes it sound like it's faster than a Mad Max film. And it's absolutely not. It is absolutely the furthest possible thing from what that title conjures in your imagination. Blade Runner. And of course, if you read about where the title came from, it's just it was a title of a book that was on the screenwriter's shelf, and Ridley Scott was at his home and saw that. They were like, well, what is he? He's not a detective, clearly. Even Scott acknowledged that apparently when they were having conversations. He said, like, what is this guy? He's not a detective. What is he? And they had to come up with a title for him. And he mentioned, I think the writer mentioned Blade Runner or The Blade Runner book.
Yeah.
And they got the title from that. So, I mean, this isn't even a title that was inherently, born from these characters or from this world. It was shoehorned in because it sounded good. And it's almost like Ridley Scott at the time. And I love Ridley Scott as a filmmaker, but it's almost sounded like at the time he was his own kind of studio boss villain. You know, the way you always hear the stories of like how the studio bosses made us do this, or the studio made us do this, or whatever. And like, and we've heard so many films just falling apart in the edit because of that. It almost feels like Ridley Scott just volunteered to be his own studio boss villain in his own production, because he's challenging who this character is throughout the filmmaking of it. And even the title just made things worse. It sounded like the note of a studio boss. Can we make this more actiony?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you're doing, but you're the one suggesting it, and it is affecting. I'm sorry, but when I say let's watch Blade Runner to somebody who hasn't seen the film, Marcus, were you expecting something with a little bit more action in it?
I mean, fundamentally, I expected him to have a sword or something. Like, I thought he was going to be running around with a sword in this futuristic LA, and I thought, wow, this sounds awesome. And I was quite sad when there was no sword.
But even the when they do the text at the beginning of the film, where it's explaining who these people are, this is a Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Even the first time I saw it, without any knowledge of the kind of the kind of idea generation process behind it, I remember just watching it very clearly, saying, where did they come up with the name for that? Like, where's the meaning behind that name, Blade Runner?
For sure. I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine there's expanded media with Blade Runner as there are with so many things now. And I imagine there's a good answer that someone's come up with somewhere down the line. Is there an in-world reason for why these detective people are called Blade Runners? Matt?
Yeah, I have no idea. I've never actually looked into this. I mean, that thinking about back in the 80s, I actually did the same thing. I saw the title and I thought, man, that's going to be a cool film, and see the poster and it did what it was meant to do. But yeah, if you look at the bigger picture of how it preps you, it doesn't really work.
If I said to you, take the poster of Chinatown, take the poster of Blade Runner, which one do you think will be a more entertaining noir detective story?
Exactly.
For sure.
Come on, man. There is a problem here, you know? So, yeah.
But I think it comes back around again to the world and the world being more interesting within the story. Like the guy, Roy is, I can't remember the exact wording, but and the Tears in the Rain speech he gives, but he's saying, I've seen armored ships, you know, do this, and I've seen this, and I'm like, but I want to see that, you know. I think I want to go and explore all that. I want to go and see all these things, and I think my takeaway from this, I want to talk a little bit about legacy and kind of what it means now and things like that in a second, but like, I think my kind of takeaway from this at the moment is I feel like there's a more interesting world knocking around in this story, and I wonder if maybe that's a similar thing that you might find with something like Star Wars, for example. There's a more interesting world going on here than that first film that we saw. Just Star Wars got lots more, and Blade Runner didn't.
But I 2 points actually on that. First of all, I really love when. I totally agree. Like, I want to see Offworld. You know, there is a graphic novel actually. There's one set on in the city, and there's one Offworld, and they're both very good actually. Yeah. I don't know if Offworld is. I can't remember. Maybe Offworld hasn't come out yet actually, but the first one's very, very good. It's worth checking out. But I love when characters make those little references, and your imagination just goes on fire straight away. I love that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now I want to see that movie, you know? It's like when somebody says, I'm in the mood for, you know, and they meant McDonald's or something like that. And now you're annoyed because you know you can't have it and you just want it now, you know, that kind of thing. And it's, for me, you know, Jaws, when they do the, when he talks about the Indianapolis, is it? The ship that went down during the war, and no one knew they were there, and all that kind of stuff, and the sharks are picking them off. That's just, I love great storytelling in stories, if that makes sense. When characters are telling a story of their own, I love that. So I like that scene. I think that's one of the reasons why that scene captures our imagination so much, is because it's just those little glimpses into what the world is, and what a shame to extinguish the life, so to speak, of this character. Absolutely. When he has these stories, he's seen some difficulties, you know, he's seen some things. The other point I was just mentioning about Star Wars is I think the opening scene, when you guys were talking about the opening scene and that really long, beautiful, the pyramid and so on, the flames and everything, I think that's Ridley Scott trying to one up George Lucas, because I really do believe that, because it is it's one of the most iconic openings of science fiction, and I mean, I would consider Star Wars fantasy more than sci-fi, obviously, but it's. I think for a studio boss, they don't care. They don't see the difference, I don't think. But I think, to me, that was Ridley Scott just going, yeah, I want my Star Wars opening shot, you know, and this is it. And it's just, I can't give him the big ship, but I can give you a big, beautiful set piece, and it's incredible. Anyway,
definitely, yeah. I mean, we talk about those sort of Roy Batty last sort of monologue, and I think it's so perfect that we don't see that stuff as well, because it's just it's the fact that we'll never see it, and
it wouldn't fit that world. It wouldn't fit that. Yeah, it wouldn't fit into that film.
Yeah,
sure.
But he's seen things that we wouldn't believe, and we are never going to see it, and that always hits me, that we can kind of imagine what that would be, but he's the only one who's seen it. And that's really, really profound. It always gets me that, you can see it's a grown man almost in tears every time I see that. But,
I totally agree with you.
Sorry.
It's the great, it's just a very small thing. I totally agree. It's the great thing I think that science fiction does. I'm a tremendous Doctor Who fan, and I think Doctor Who, when it works best, is when it's doing stuff like that, and it's referencing something that you can't capture. that we can't
Yeah.
understand. And that's what that show does so well. And I think maybe that's why I sat up in that moment. Maybe that's why I recognized something that I loved in that moment, because I think you're right. It is that it's so moving and should never be seen. But yeah, I'm kind of crapping on my own point, but you know what I mean. Please carry on.
I think, yeah. I think the idea of it being, I think I mentioned earlier, it feels to me more like Roy Batty's story.
Yeah.
I think it's because, like we were talking about, his story is so compelling. And I think as well that there is so much going on in terms of like the what's happening with the characters and their conflict. I mean, it's a guy who's started to understand who they are and is trying to meet their maker, and that, how more compelling can that be? And that's why that story is so interesting. And then he meets his maker, and then he just destroys his maker
through the eyes as well. Love that.
Yeah,
lovely.
Because he can't give him any more life, and it's just interesting, like philosophical wise. It poses these sort of questions that are really, really, really profound. But at the same time, there are moments that just are really boring in this film. But it's such a compelling story. Yeah. But there's some moments where you just really need to get to the next bit. But I maybe it's being overindulgent. It's kind of one of the reasons I have issue with the second film as well, because it keeps that overindulgence in something. I know Villeneuve makes long films, but he also makes really compelling short, like hour and a half films. I mean something like Sicario as well, which is maybe, I'm trying to think. I think he might be one of his short films, or Enemy, I think is the other one he did. I think they're quite short, but they're so there's no fat on it at all. Yeah, there's no fat on those films at all, and I think both these films do have some fat that needs to be trimmed. Yeah, that's a great visual.
Yeah, isn't it just? Yeah,
just trim the fat.
I just very, very briefly, because we're getting on for time here, I want to talk about the kind of the legacy of the film and how it sits in 2022, given that we've just passed 2019 when the film was actually set and things like that. And of course, the short answer is the legacy of Blade Runner is Blade Runner 2049 and the wonderful visual effects and things like that. But as a film goer and as a movie goer, what do you think the legacy from a kind of an adaptation and a genre sort of thing is? How do you think that it's changed the way we approach filmmaking beyond just the visuals, I suppose, to whomever?
Matt, do you want to go for
it? Yeah, I think its legacy is in its design as well. I mean, visually, there's so many films after this that try and replicate that, and I don't think any of them do it really successfully. Maybe
replicate, very good.
Maybe 2049 kind of does. But I still find this world so interesting, and it was, I think, for me as well, there might be a nostalgia element, because when I saw it, I mean, I'm an old fart, so I remember seeing it at the time and thinking, I've never seen anything like this before, and the sort of depth of that design has never been really replicated. I mean, something like Lord of the Rings, maybe, where you have a real sort of world that's built from scratch. But I think also it to me, and I may be wrong with this, it did start this sort of trend of science fiction style films that have they're more than spectacle. Yeah. And it's interesting that this film is more than spectacle in a time where everybody was wanting spectacle, where this is sort of the birth of the blockbuster was happening. I think it is an issue with a lot of films in this I guess genre, maybe not calling science fiction a sort of a set genre, but this the style of film is problematic these days. I think there's a lot of films at the moment that aren't really taking those lessons from this film. The same way as there's a lot of sort of dramas that are not taking lessons from what people were doing in the 70s as well. I've been going on a really sort of deep dive with the sort of films of 60s and 70s, and I'm just always surprised how well constructed these films are. And I go and watch something like not to criticize people, but like a Netflix sort of funded film or Netflix produced film that are really kind of overindulgent, and they don't end where they need to end, and they're kind of meandering and things like that, and they're overly long because they're thinking of like an audience sitting at home and things like that. Maybe, I'm not sure, but the motivations are different. And I think this is what Blade Runner does really well. It tries different things. It tries something. It did something completely new for the time, and I still think it feels fresh. It was so new at the time that they didn't know what this thing was, to the point that they felt they had to put voiceover on it so the audience can understand what's going on. So I think it's still the case that day. It still feels fresh now. It doesn't feel sort of visually dated. It doesn't feel sort of narratively dated.
Timeless.
I don't think it can be. It can't. Yeah, it's timeless. To make it a simpler way of describing it.
Sure,
but yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
John,
I would just be repeating. Matt has said everything so well there, but I would say if you want to see a film that is part of the Blade Runner legacy, go watch Ex Machina. And
yeah, definitely.
And without spoiling anything in it, this is a film that does challenge what it means to have an identity in a science fiction world, to play with identity in the science fiction genre. And it does so on a level that I haven't seen since Blade Runner. So I think it's that would be my contribution to that discussion. I think Blade Runner is an amazing film, and it is one that has changed the game for so many filmmakers, just in terms of aesthetic. I think it's changed the game for game designers. I think we're seeing so many video games drawing on the aesthetic of the Blade Runner universe. I think it has inspired an entire, I think probably the visual effects artists who are leading the way in all the big blockbusters now probably owe Blade Runner an insane debt of gratitude. And just from a storytelling point of view, the idea of, I don't know if it's the first science fiction film to play with deep, complex ideas like the way Blade Runner does, but this is, I think, the film that legitimized that idea, that a sci-fi film doesn't have to be, we're leaving the atmosphere, and it doesn't have to be laser blasters, and it doesn't have to be, just impossible versions of our society. It can actually be just that little step forward in our society, where it still very much feels like this could be my future. Blade Runner feels like it could be your future. It's the guy reading the newspaper, sitting at the food stall waiting for his dinner. It's the police
Coca-Cola
car
advert as well.
It's
recognizable things.
This doesn't feel like it's this beautifully polished veneer that we kind of get with like movies like Prometheus, which is a Ridley Scott. It's where all the spacesuits are just like these kind of, in a weird way. This is a guy who's famous for creating real, let's say, for lack of a better word, kind of blue collar sci-fi, and he went down a very polished road then later on with some of his other work. But so to me, those are the kind of things that this film has done so well. And from a screenwriting point of view, it does lend, its ideas, its world building, it's playing with genre conventions it's borrowing from other genres as well, which I loved. Strip away the bells and whistles from Inception, and this is a heist movie. Strip away all the time travel from Tenet, and it's an espionage film. Strip away the sci-fi from Blade Runner, and it's a noir private eye film. And Blade Runner is, from my memory anyway, the first to do that.
For sure,
so well.
I think it's a great lesson for writers to look at. To not be afraid to play in genre, and to look at other things. For science fiction doesn't have to be that big spaceship. It can be this. It can be grimy. It can be dirty. And you're right. I think Blade Runner started that, or certainly helped that along the way for sure. So the question is then, guys, does Blade Runner deserve its place in the script department vaults of classics that I've just decided we have? What do you think?
We custodians of classic cinema.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's down there past the bins.
Yeah, I think its place in cinema, I think, is undeniable. I think it in the history of cinema and in terms of its influence is just undeniable for a film that completely bombed as well. It's just incredible how its position in cinema at the moment. And yeah, so I think I'd definitely put it in there. But
put it in the vaults.
I'm the super fan.
Yeah, John, would you put it in the vaults?
Absolutely. I think I might be kind of hot and cold on that film, but I would never deny its place in cinema history, and I don't ever want a reality where this film doesn't exist. And I'm kind of secretly glad there are many different versions of the film, because you know what? If I ever became super hot in this film, I've got a lot of I can trawl through the back kind of catalog of Blade Runner attempts, and so I kind of secretly love that as well. I don't have to be in a certain mood to watch Chinatown. I kind of have to be in a certain mood to watch Blade Runner, but there's no point in Blade Runner where I'm thinking this is a bad film, or this is not doing something special. It's just, it doesn't always hold my attention all the time. That's really it. I love the characters, I love the world, I love the setting. I want an open world RPG experience set in the world of Tyrell and so on. And I was as excited as anybody for Blade Runner 2049, despite my feelings about the first film. Blade Runner 2049 is one of my favorite movie-going experiences of all time. You'd really have to try hard to top that one. Got it on Blu-ray first day it came out. Afterwards, wouldn't change a thing on it, although I can see exactly where you come from, Matt, with your with the pacing issues and stuff. That. We'll have to do another video about that. But I love the world. I love the universe, love the characters, love the idea. And like you said, for any film that bombed and still is on so many people's top 10 lists, that just speaks volumes. Imagine if it didn't bomb,
Yeah.
I think something to say just very quickly, just to talk about the fact that you saw that in the cinema as well, John, 2049. And I've seen Blade Runner in the cinema. I'm talking about sort of inspiration as well. It inspired my one of my first sort of big short films, and the short film got played as a featurette before Blade Runner. So I got to see my film and then Blade Runner, and then I saw how much I was ripping off Blade Runner in my own film, unconsciously as well. But seeing that in the cinema, which at that point I'd never watched it in the cinema, because I was too young to watch it at the time, or even when the re-releases as well, I totally missed it. It's a totally different experience watching it in the cinema, and I did make those comparisons between 2049, because you watch 2049 at home. It's a totally different experience, because that is such a big screen film with the sound and everything.
Absolutely.
It totally takes you in there. And I think that how you're prepped to sort of watch the film that experience totally changes. I think I forgive a lot more things.
When I watch 2049 at home, I'm projecting my experiences of it watching in the cinema onto it. So I absolutely kind of I know I'm remembering it more than I'm watching it, if that makes sense. With Blade, with the original, I never saw it in the cinema, but I want to see it in the cinema, and I think that says a lot. There are films I don't ever want to see again. This is not one of them. So I think that put it in the vault, Marcus, unless you disagree.
I mean, who am I? Who am I to take it from the vault on this occasion? I would put it in the vault, but it would be mainly for the visuals for that, and perhaps that's unkind of me. But I feel like I would have to put it on a special shelf that was categorized for visuals rather than, you know, the Godfather last week, our inclusion in there. It's everything. It's everything for this one special section for visuals, but it's in the vault for sure. So that's good.
Yeah, awesome.
I can't wait. I mean, I think the thing I'm most excited about is, other than at some point watching 2049 and definitely doing a review video with you guys on that, if you're up for it, introduce me to it. I'm into that. The thing I'm most excited about for these videos is to see how far we can push these this vault metaphor and until it becomes labored and beaten down. But that's good. Look,
I was going to have to be controversial someday and not put something in the vault, because
we're gonna have to.
Otherwise, it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we're not just going to pick the big hitters. There are going to be a few that perhaps are a little more controversial, but we'll get to them. We'll get to them next week, guys. We're going to be looking at the Shawshank Redemption, number 1. I believe currently still number 1 on the IMDb top 200 film list, which is we'll be talking about that a little bit. We'll be seeing how we go.
We need to make sure we ask the question: is it deserving of number 1? Because I think that's going to be an interesting question.
That will be an interesting question. I mean, we can factor that into the vault discussion. You know, perhaps there's an annex to the vault. Or I mean, we can get to that next week. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for watching, guys at home. If you'd like to check out more of our stuff, then feel free to scroll back through YouTube. We got a bunch of these on there. This will be an ongoing series, so we hope you can join us for them. Otherwise, pop over to the website, scriptdepartment.net. We got loads of stuff over there. And until next time, we screenwriters will go watch something else, and see you later. Bye-bye.